small mountain community. At the time, my graduating class was like 200, which is seemingly big, but Montrose is very spread out. So it's pulling from farm fields and counties far away. But I had no plans to be an educator. I had no educators in my family. My dad managed a mass production factory with people who were on work release, so in prison at night, and then we worked for my father. And so I would go work there too. So that was one experience. But then my mom opened up a dance studio, and it was the only dance studio in like a 2-hour radius. And so that was my only real exposure to teaching, was my mom teaching what seemed like our entire town how to dance, including me. So I learned a lot about empathy and understanding from my mom. She had a dance class called New Rhythms, which is for adults with special needs and children with either mental disabilities or physical disabilities. And I got to assist in that. So how do you teach a kid who can't hear or feel how to dance? You learn a lot about humans at a young age. And then my father too picked up on that, and he started bringing in adults with special needs to give them some money. And they would like pack boxes for the supply chain. And so I was always kind of in a teacher world, but when I was ready to graduate, I was chasing money, and I was like, I can draw kind of. And architects, I think, make a lot of money. I guess I'll just do that. So my parents bought me my first Dell laptop computer right when I graduated, and then shortly thereafter I said, I don't think I want to be an architect, and defaulted to the thing that I loved doing the most, which was being with kids. I always volunteered at vacation Bible schools and be on the other side. So chose Concordia and St. Paul for my education on a track scholarship. I wanted to get as far away from home as possible to experience something new. It also felt like everyone in my graduating class was going to Colorado State University, and I just wanted to go elsewhere. So I chose a very cool place to come, and it worked out really well.
That much colder than Chile.
It was. I thought it was cold. I thought it was cold.
Buildings and building humans.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
So what was it like those first few years as a teacher, or first time you're walking? Did it feel like, yep, this is it, or was it like, oh my God, what did I sign up for?
A little bit of both of that. So, what's crazy is that they allow a 21-year-old to be in charge of other humans. It's really bizarre, because when you're student teaching, you have other adults in the room, and legally you can't be by yourself, and so you always feel like someone has your back even when you're in charge. But in 2009, when I became a teacher, there were 0 jobs. Like, it was really hard to get one. So I remember standing at the convention center in Minneapolis with hundreds of other teachers at the job fair for education. And I stood in a line for one job for an hour with hundreds of other people. I was just bawling because I was about to get married. And I was like, I'm not gonna be able to support my family. Like, what am I gonna do? And luckily I was able to get one job. Of the graduating class of 50 people in education that I graduated with, only 2 of us got full-time jobs. The other 48 went into substitute teaching. And of those 48, the vast majority didn't even go into education afterwards. So their degree just kind of went away. So I felt very lucky to have a job. So when I was offered one, I was like, I can't leave it. I need to do literally everything I can to hold on to this job. But that first time when the door shut, it's kind of terrifying, because you understand very quickly that every decision you make has an impact, whether it's negative or positive. I mean, I've done plenty of positive things, but also made a lot of mistakes. And unfortunately, that's how you learn as a teacher, is you learn so much through mistakes. Because what I've also learned is not a lot of people have a mentor teacher. I was lucky enough to have that, but as I've traveled a little bit, some new teachers are just put into the classroom and then the door shuts and they're like, what am I gonna do? What is happening? So the first year was eye-opening, but I also did have, since there wasn't a lot of jobs, I was the youngest person in the building, which meant I had all these mentors, just like looking to mentor me, because they'd been doing it for so long and they were happy to have like the youth come into the building to help. And so I got a lot of perspective quickly on how to do things properly, and so it was very helpful. So I was overwhelmed, but I also had a lot of support.
And so then how did that transition into the stories? Was it your first story, you talked about the sticky dog?
Yeah.
Tell the story.
Sure. So I had no plans to be an author. Let's be very clear about that. I was just focused on being a teacher. And since I did have a mentor, one of the things that we had to do, I was told, was reflect on every lesson. And for those of you who don't teach middle school, I teach in like mass production. So I have about 150 kids. I teach the same same lesson over and over and over again each day. And so my mentor teacher said, after every lesson, you need to write down what went well and what didn't go well. That way you can change it for the following year and improve upon it. I was like, okay, that sounds like a lot of work, but all right. So I printed off like 300 sheets of paper, made a little template, put it on a binder on my desk, just like ready to reflect and improve. And the other thing people didn't tell me in college was what teacher tired feels like. So I finished my first day teaching and just like collapsed. With a weighted blanket, no, don't talk to me. And so like the first week I did no reflecting because I was so exhausted and I had other things that took priority, lesson planning, parent phone calls. But because I wanted to do really well, I wanted to have something written down when I met with my mentor teacher. Anything, literally anything to show. And so the day that I was supposed to meet with him, this student stood up and said something so inappropriate, and I wish I could say it, but I'm on camera and there's a child here. And it was hilarious though. And so I thought that'll never be topped in my teaching career. Like, this is so funny. So I just wrote it down. The kid said this, and I put the date just in that reflection binder. And that's what started the next 15 years, is I just wrote something down every single day that I wanted to remember. And it started off very focused on humor. And kids say funny things every day, or do something funny every day. So if you were to look through my journal, the first couple hundred entries are just silly things, right? But then as I matured as an adult, so did my entries. And so I started to change them into things that maybe hurt me or were hard, things that inspired me, moments that I witnessed between children that I thought no one would ever believe unless I wrote it down. And I think a lot of people believe that I was writing paragraphs and like fine detail. No, it's literally just a sentence, and it's not kept in like a file cabinet where you can go find them by year. It's just messy. They're on sticky notes, they're on electronic files. I draw my students every year, all 150 of them, so they have themselves to look at, and I draw them in a way that I want to remember. And it's in this big collage that they can color and find themselves. And so I have all these little ways to remember, and I happen to have a really good memory. So when I read 2 sentences and I can see that kid's face in the yearbook, that's all it takes for me to just go right back into the memory. So that's how it started, is that. When I went on leave to help promote my Matt Sprouts book, that's when I started telling them online, because I figured if I'm gonna promote a book, I should be somewhere visible, and that's kind of how they started online. I think the perception is from a lot of people that, oh, I got big social media following, and then I got a book deal, but it's been completely flipped. Yeah.
Was one of my things I was gonna ask, like, how did you get into the whole social media, what drove that?
Yeah, I can talk about that too. So what actually started social media is in the middle of the pandemic, I was teaching in a room by myself. I did Zoom for like half a year, and I was really struggling with my own mental health, just like, because we had to walk in, you couldn't talk or see another teacher, and then you had to shut your door, and then you had to leave in the same way. So you would go see nobody and then see kids on the screen, and it was just pandemonium every day of parents needing something or kids needing something. It was really hard. And so I needed a break in the middle of the day. Like, I needed a mental break. And so I joined TikTok just for something to look at that was different. I didn't plan on doing any dancing or anything like that. I just joined TikTok. And then I started making videos, just poking fun at myself on like the things I've struggled with as a teacher. I had like maybe 1,000 followers. Like, I wasn't trying to like become an influencer, which I can barely say without throwing up. And so I started posting these, and really my first dive into social media was I did this. We were in the Target parking lot in Bloomington, and it was flooded from a rainstorm. And being a father, I knew where the drain was, and so I was like, I'll unclog the drain. And so I went and started swirling around the drain, and the whole parking lot started to spin, the whole thing. And my wife filmed it, I put it on TikTok, and the next day I had 20 million views.
Oh,
And I have never been so overwhelmed. Like, I had every company I can think of reaching out to sell product and pair with me. I was on Fox 9, WCCO, I did like the round in Minneapolis. And
Circling the drain.
yes, I'm circling the drain, but I also tried to capitalize on it, because at the time I had produced my independently published book, Matt Sprouts. It was made by me and a local company. My wife and I took out of savings to make that happen, and so I was like, ooh, attention, I should try and use this to sell. So I was like, people seem to like water tricks, I'll be the water trick guy. So if you want to see some really embarrassing things, and if you, hearing this story, if you watch my face, I think you'll feel like the want to be noticed. You know what I mean? And so you'll see me spinning water bottles, doing all these magic tricks with water. It just didn't translate, and I burned out really quick. I did it for like 3 weeks in the summer, and then I was like, well, this is exhausting. Like, I don't know how people do this. However, I did sell quite a few books. And so that's what helped propel me to get a book deal a couple years later. I had sold quite a few via TikTok and independent bookstores. Yeah, so that was my first dive. But when I started Instagram for sticky notes, I knew that I couldn't do it every day like I did with the water trick. And I knew it had to be genuine and repeatable. I couldn't do something that was that took a lot of production or had high production value. And so I was thinking, what can I do that's repeatable, genuine, and that's easy. It requires me just looking at this thing and talking. I was like, well, I have thousands of stories, which I never really looked at. Like, I wrote them all down, but rarely did I even have time to go back and like reminisce of my own teaching career. Teachers know this. It's really hard to find the time to reflect. And so I told my first story. The story that I told was I wanted people just to understand what it's like to be in a classroom situation and not know what to do. That's what I wanted people to feel. And I told my first story, it did fairly well, and then the next 10 that I told all went viral. They were all over 1 million views. That's what I consider viral. And after each one, I was like, oh, I'm gonna stop, because I don't want to try and chase anything. And so I'd wait maybe a week, then I'd tell another story. And it was the responses that I was getting that made me want to keep doing it, because people started saying like, oh, that makes me remember this. Or, oh my gosh, I remember when my teacher did this. I was like, oh, this is a positive space on the internet? Like, I didn't know that existed. And so I did it. I just did it in a relaxed way, and I just continued telling stories. And once Matt Sprouts came out and was a New York Times bestseller, then my publisher was like, what else do you write? And I said, you know, something that I think I really want to do if I don't get to do this author thing long is I'd really like to make a book not necessarily for teachers, but for society. I really want people to understand what we do, because I think what a lot of people think we do is just open a curriculum book and go, today we'll be learning this. If you will turn to this page, now do the work. And that's maybe 25% of what I do. And I really want to show stories that highlight the humanity in teaching, just like really get at the core of what we do. And so I pitched the book to the publisher. They loved it. And so then I had the difficult task of choosing 100 stories to put in the book. And fun fact, it says 100, but there's only 99 in there. I don't know if we need to do an amendment to that, but it was like something about the number of pages in a book had to be cut, so it was too late. So 99 stories.
Yeah, and these are amazing, like, and everybody can, I think, find something that will resonate with you. The one that struck me is the one with the snail.
Oh, yeah.
As a kid, that was just needed to take time, and one of my kids is like that, and so it's just like, oh my gosh, yes. Every time we go to a conference, right, with the teacher, maybe you can tell him that I can finish this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, he knows that, but he just needs to take his time.
Yeah.
And that's amazing how you guys know the kids, and that's one of the things that I found when you're growing up as a teacher, right? Good teachers, bad teachers, whatever. But the first time I kind of realized that what a teacher really is when I started going to conferences with my kids. These are like co-parents almost.
Yeah.
Right? You guys have to know that sometimes you know my kid better than I know my kid, and they bring up things like, he does this, or she does this, or, oh yeah, that's right, I didn't notice that was a trend.
Yeah.
And so that's amazing. I don't know how you do it, but
I don't know either. I think most teachers will give you that answer. We don't know how we do it. I think what's one of the hardest parts about teaching is the bonding happens very quickly with kids. It happens, and it's intense, and it happens in ways that you aren't prepared for. So as a language arts teacher too, I ask kids often to write, and so sometimes things come out in writing that won't come out verbally, and some of those things are really hard to go to sleep knowing. Like, oh, if I don't call Child Protective Services tonight, and I don't get a hold of anyone tonight, that kid doesn't sleep anywhere. And so you make that phone call, and no one picks up, but you have to go home to your own family, and you're gonna have dinner in a nice warm place, and you're like, well, I guess I'm staying here at school until I get a hold of somebody. Like, that's what people don't see. And I know that's part of the job, like, you know, I think by law I have to call Child Protective Services if I know something is wrong. But the weight that you carry as an educator, can be really positive for the great things you see, but it's also can be extremely heavy. Yeah. So that's why it was hard too, like I would love to just pump this book full of only positive stories, but I definitely needed to include stories that were difficult and that people need to understand happen to children and teachers witness it all, and we have to figure out how to handle it, not 10 days from the moment it happens, but like right now,
Yeah.
right now, and that's really difficult.
So how did you choose out of, I'm sure you have thousands of stories,
Yeah.
but what did you, criteria did you use to?
Well, I'll give you like the marketing standpoint
Yeah.
first. So from a marketing standpoint, publisher wanted me to include stories that were popular. And so an easy way to go look at what stories are popular was I have data on my phone of Instagram and social media. So I went and chose from there. And then it was literally just going through memories. And if I chose stories that like, I would have like maybe a couple hundred to choose from each day. And then I would go to sleep, and if I woke up thinking of a story again, I'd be like, okay, I think that one should be in there. I also had to do a little bit with so I illustrated the entire book as well. And sometimes there was a story where I'm like, I can't draw that. So I don't know if I should include something that I can't draw in a way that like represents the person well and also gets to the heart of the story. Yeah.
And it's tough to curate, there's so many that have to do that with the books, and there's
Yeah.
so many coming out, and you have to pick which ones you get the stories and so
Yeah.
on through,
And it's hard to,
tough.
it is tough because, you know, as a book buyer, right, book buyer and bookseller, you don't know what's gonna resonate with people either. You have to choose ahead of time and predict what will resonate. And that's what's cool about being a storyteller, is I know that it's gonna resonate with someone, I just don't know necessarily who the audience is. And so that's what I tell people who like meet with me and say, I've got a kid's picture book that I wanna make, or like I have this business idea, what do I do? And I always say your audience is out there. They are, it just might take you a while to find them. And that was part of my journey with like the Matt Sprouts. I worked for 15 years to try and get that book published, and everyone in the industry told me it wasn't good and rejected for 15 years, but I always had experts in my room, my students, who said it was good. And so you just have to keep an eye out for who is the true audience and chase that.
So tell me, I was gonna go into that, what is it, what are the books about, are they,
The Matt Sprout
Yeah,
series?
the Matt Sprouts, yeah.
Do you guys know the history of my publishing journey?
No, it'd be great to hear.
Okay, I'll give you like 15 years is hard to condense, but I'll do it. So in my classroom when I became a teacher, the other thing I didn't have was I didn't have a quality that kids would remember about me. For example, you might have a teacher that is the dancing teacher, just always like dancing to instructions, or the teacher that's always singing or telling jokes, and I was like, what will I be known for? And I came up with this idea of telling stories in class from my childhood, because I do have a really good memory. I can remember all of my embarrassing moments. And so I told my first embarrassing moment to kids, I was like, hey, if I tell you an embarrassing story about me, will you do what I ask? And they're like, we'll see, I guess. And so one of the first stories I told was going in for my first kiss. I'm not gonna tell you how old I was. I'm going in for my first kiss. I trip, I headbutt my girlfriend, and she gets a bloody nose. Kids ate it up. They're like, more of those. And so, at the age of 21, I went home. I used my wife's computer, because my computer was a desktop at school. I didn't own one. And I just decided I should start typing all these embarrassing moments before I forget, before I get old and memory loss kicks in. And as I'm writing them, I started to weave them all together. And I was like, oh, it's kind of cool, like to have like maybe a book of stories. I've also broken all 10 of my toes, unrelated. They don't look like horrific, like mangled mac and cheese. Like they're normal looking toes, but I've broken all 10 throughout my history of being alive. And so I thought that'd be kind of a neat title. And so I made that as a title. It's just called 10 Broken Toes. Illegally printed it on the school printer. 3-hole punched it. All the teachers are laughing, they know exactly. Yep, printed it, put it in a 3-ring binder. I put it in my room, and kids who were reluctant to read what we were reading in class was like, did you like the bloody nose girlfriend story? And they're like, yeah. I was like, go over there, go read that. And they did, and then a couple weeks later, one kid stole it, brought it to a different team in the building, and they started reading it. And pretty soon I was like, oh, people like my stories. So I created a story jar in class of just all these memories from my childhood. And if kids finish the task, they'd pick it out. And so I was like, well, maybe I created something good. So I took that book and I sent it to agents in New York and publishers. The way that process works is you send a letter that says, hello, my name's Matt Eicheldinger. I have this book about broken toes. Would you like to make it? And you don't even send the book, you send the idea. And then you wait 2 to 3 months for a response. It's a long time. And then usually you get a standard rejection letter. Just like, thank you, this book isn't for me, best of luck. Sometimes they're pretty rough. Like, this book is not good. Do something different. Those are few and far between, but it doesn't lessen the fact of how much they hurt. So I sent letters for 15 years, tried for a really long time. And my students always told me it was good. Those are the only opinions I really needed to hear to keep going. Then, for some reason, in the middle of the pandemic, I decided to make the darn thing myself. And so, did a Kickstarter campaign, raised the money, used up some of our savings, printed 2,000 copies of a book that didn't look like that one, and spent 2 years just trying to sell it. And it took a long time, but ultimately it got me noticed by a publisher, and I signed a book deal. It was like an eighth of what I made teaching, like not enough to live off of. So my wife and I planned to do 1 year of me outside the classroom, just take a shot at the dream. And so I took a year off, and the first week that it was out in the world, it was a New York Times bestseller. And so it's really cool to meet with students and talk to them about the idea of what no means and what feedback is and what the difference is. Because like I said, your audience is out there, especially if you can feel it and hear that you're doing the right thing. So the Matt Sprout series is autobiographical. And so the first book is like 85% true. It follows Matt Eicheldinger, even though it's Matt Sprout's like Matt Eicheldinger by Matt Eicheldinger is a mouthful. And so the Matt Sprout series captures the things that I did in childhood, but just like my platform, I weave in lessons. And so it is humorous, I think. It is funny, but there is life lessons embedded in there. And the more books that I write, I found the better I am at incorporating those lessons in a very natural way, instead of just being like the mom lecturing the child on like the right thing to do. So it's been fun.
Are those also collections of stories then, or is it more of a?
Like the first book is like 85% autobiographical, and there's stories that my students would recognize in there. Like there's a scene where I throw poop at a llama. Like that's a story I tell in my classroom. The llama jumps the fence and tries to trample me. So they would recognize stories in there. But yeah, so there's 2 books out now, and then the third one releases this summer.
Oh, you already have it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to have you come back when that releases.
Yeah. And then I have, just like other teachers know, a lot of times you don't have the material you need to create things. You then have to do it, right? Or I should say go find it. And so something I had always created was poetry for my kids, because they'd always read Shel Silverstein. So for 15 years I also wrote poetry, and I would put it on the board and be like, so here's our poem for the day, and they're like, who wrote that? It's horrible. I was like, oh, it's not me. But what it did do is it made me a better writer, but it also, all my poems are properly vetted. So if kids didn't like it, I would change it until it was good enough. And so releasing on my birthday, just out of coincidence, in September is an illustrated poetry book called Holes in My Underwear. And so I hope it's a book that teachers can use, because there's not a lot of poetry books out there for middle school. But also a book that like a parent would read and like see the hidden meaning that I put in there for parents, while the kid's laughing at like the butt crack of the plumber that I drew. The parents are like, oh, this is actually insightful. Like that's the hope. But, yeah.
That was all I had. Covered a lot of the things I wanted to cover.
Okay.
Anybody else, any other questions, comments, your own stories?
Yeah.
Would you like to share with us the 100th story that we
Story? I could share a story. It's one of the first things I wrote down as a teacher, which is not in the book. So I taught in a very wealthy district when I started, and since I'm not from Minnesota, I didn't know anything about it. I grew up in Colorado, moved here, and when I got the job, I remember my college advisor said, "That's a very high pressure job. It's very, like, do you understand the parents that are there? They have very high expectations for their kids." And I was 21, I was like, no, I don't know, like, this is gonna be fun. And I learned very quickly during open house that parents of 11 and 12-year-olds were asking me about how we're prepping for SAT and ACT. And I was like, oh, I just took that. Like, that's interesting. And so, yeah, it was, you know, as I, you know, grew in that district, it was fine. There were high-pressure families, but it wasn't an overarching theme. However, for parent-teacher conferences, I was scared. I was really nervous that all these parents who have high-paying jobs that see me in their suit and tie, were gonna see this 21-year-old, and like, how am I ready to teach their kid? That was the narrative I had made up in my own head. So I went and bought a suit, and with the shoulder pads and everything, I hand wrote 150 letters to each family, so that when they came, I would hand it to them. They could read it about their kid. I compiled data. This is before we had online systems. Wrote it all down, like, not even to, like, it was more of, I was coming in on defense, right? I'm coming in to, like, make a stand that I'm good enough to teach your child. And so the first family came in, they're both wearing business attire. I'm like, oh, here we go, I'm ready. And they walk in, their kid's there, and they all sit down. So I go into my pre-planned spiel and just lay it all out, and it's quiet. And I'm just like, oh, I'm about to get it. Like, I'm doing something wrong. And halfway through, the father holds up his hand like this. And I go, oh boy, like, what did I do wrong? And then he looks at his kid and goes, can you step outside? I was like, my father has said things like that before. Kid leaves. As soon as the door clicks shut, the mom loses it. Just starts bawling. And I'm like, oh God, tissues. So I go grab tissues, I bring it over, and I'm just like waiting. And the dad starts speaking because the mom's so inconsolable and goes, Mr. Ike, we're so happy with how our kid's doing academically. We're so proud of how they're doing, but we need your help. Our son doesn't have any friends. We've tried everything. Can you help us? And it was a moment for me where I was like, me? Me. I just graduated. Do you know what I was doing like 2 years ago in college? Like, do you know who you're asking? But so I did. I was able to help right away. I got him connected into clubs. We found him tables at lunch, and within just a couple weeks, that kid had a network of friends. And it was the first time I realized as a teacher, like, oh, this is what teaching's about. Oh, I see. This is the big part of the job. Yeah. So that's a story that I wish I could have included, but I think it's a bit too long.
I don't know why I wore mascara
I will say too, any questions you have, I'm pretty transparent. So if you have questions about the book industry, about my time as a teacher, the world in general, okay, you know, I'm happy to answer anything you have.
I'm just curious what your percentage is. With the 85% is, what's the 15%?
Of things that are false in there. I would say they're not even that false, they're just highly exaggerated. You know what I mean? So like there might be a scene where it's like very loud and a lot of stuff happening. It wasn't that.
They're the same publisher then, after all of them?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky that it's Andrews McNeil Publishing, and the full circle moment for me is the only thing I read, like literally the only thing I would read growing up is Calvin and Hobbes. It's the only thing. And the first people to offer me a book deal was the company that produces Calvin and Hobbes. And so I was on the phone call with the editor because they were just like vetting me to make sure I'm a like regular human being. And so they're talking through and they're like, and you know, you might know some of our notable works, and then she lists a couple, and she's like, in Calvin and Hobbes, and I like immediately tear up. And because I'm like, oh, this feels right, like I think this is it. And it ended up being the thing. And so they've been a creator first publisher. They work with me to execute my vision. So it's a good partnership. I've heard lots of stories from other authors where like, once they sell the rights away to the book, like, I don't own that. I don't think many people understand. I don't own the rights to that book anymore. It's not mine. So some publishers will take someone's story and change it. Change the character name, change the plot. And that hasn't happened to me. I have a great relationship with my editors. We work together to make the best book possible. I think it also helps that I'm open-minded. And I come in with wanting to learn more. So when my editor says, we should change this, I always ask, what is the reason behind that? And we try and find common ground. So far I've only pitched books to Andrews McNeil Publishing. It's been a great relationship. I think I'll be in other publishers at some point because they have a specialty. And like if I want to do like an early learner book or a picture book, They probably could do that, but they also don't heavily market those. They're more known for poetry, calendars, and then they've dabbled into middle grade literature.
You did illustrations in those books in particular, right? Did you do those?
Yeah, I have no background in art. I was a doodler growing up, so like if I was sitting in the audience right now watching an author, I would be drawing on like my shoe or something. So I was able to draw. So part of the book deal, when I did my independent book, there was only spot art. There was maybe 30 pictures on the of each chapter heading. And I'd never drawn on an iPad before, and the editor was like, hey, just one thing, like if we signed this book deal, do you think you could draw 100 pictures? And at the time I was like, no, I can't. But I went, yeah, absolutely. Like, I will do it. I'll do it. And so that's been fun too, is like I've never been in a space where I was only creating for me. I've always had to be in a space where I'm creating for others. And I know I'm creating for others now as an author, but I mean like I always created for my students. Any output of creativity was for my kids. So to like sit at home in silence and be like, what do I want to make today is a luxury. And I wish a lot of people had that opportunity to chase whatever it is. And so I very much treat being an author as this is temporary. I expect to be back in the classroom at some point, but I am enjoying this while it lasts. And the absolute best part of this is not seeing my book on a shelf, which is still cool, like that people read what I wrote, like that can't get past that. But it's meeting with people. That is the absolute best thing, because I get to hear your story, where you come from. Maybe if the book reminded you of something, like that's the absolute best part, is getting to see people from different walks of life.
Now, it's your family now, so your older kids, now your great kids too, has that changed, like the stories that you tell? Have you told them all of the stories?
No, my kids didn't know a lot of my stories, but what the best part of having kids that are the reader age of my books is my kids read my books before I publish them. And so my oldest will read the first draft, and I get very blunt feedback. My youngest has helped me come up with the titles. So the way in which I write, at least for now, is I don't have a plan at all. I don't think, oh, I'm gonna write a book about this. I come up with the title. And if the title is good and I think the title will capture a kid, then I'll work around that. And so a good example is a book coming out is called, the third book of Matt Sprouts is called Matt Sprouts in the Search for the Chompy Whompers. And my daughter and I were sitting on the floor coloring, and we were drawing weird looking things. And I was like, I wonder what that is. And my daughter was like, that's a chompy whopper. And I was like, what did you say? I was like, that's a great name. That's a fabulous name. And so I just wrote it down, and then it evolved a little bit over time. But that's the way I write middle grade books right now. I just come up with the title. Same thing happened with, I signed a 3-book trilogy that comes out in like 26 and 27. I can't talk about what it is yet, but we were camping and it was raining, and that's all it took. And I wrote the whole book, I wrote the whole trilogy at night. I had a little notepad with us camping. It was like this big. And I wrote I didn't write obviously the whole thing. I wrote the plot for each book and just pumped it all out. And I was like, whew, and then it's out of my brain. And then I can go work on other things. But I very much, that's my creative process, is I choose one thing and then I'm all in until it's done. So like that book I wrote in 30 days when I was 21, and then 15 years later I was like, am I able to do that again? Like I don't even know if I can. And that one took 30 days as well. Well, it's just one process, right? Like I meet other authors who have like, you know, in those like crime scenes where it's like the yarn going to all the, I've seen authors who do that. It's like a literal wall of character, and it's like, I can't do that. Like that's just not my creative process. Any other questions?
Yeah. So I'm assuming some of the kids that were in the stories are now adults. What kind of feedback are you getting from them as they look back at what the stories that you captured?
Yeah, not a lot, because I go to high lengths to protect privacy. So many kids don't recognize themselves. I've met kids who are like, oh, I love that book, and they're in it. I don't say anything. And that's been hard too, because I know that I'm taking other people's stories, and I grapple with that sometimes. And that's why there's a lot of stories I wish I could tell that are very meaningful and I think would change a lot of people's perspectives in society. I would love to tell those stories, but I can't, because I cannot protect the privacy of that kid well enough. So yeah, it's difficult sometimes to think about that, but I have plenty of kids now that I have social media who will reach out and be like, I remember your class, I remember maybe seeing that story or maybe an element of it, but only one kid has recognized themselves and called it out, one kid, and it was really special when it happened. And so I bet it'll happen again. But that's why I have to choose the stories carefully, because if a kid does see themselves in it, it should honor them, it should honor them.
Do you remember every kid that told you the story?
Yeah, yeah.
I do.
So I do change the names, there's only one name I don't change in that book.
Do you have any techniques for remembering things? Or do all teachers remember? So I'm always impressed if you remember an entire class of names for years.
Yeah.
You walk in and like, oh, you're so and so.
Yeah.
Remember.
I don't know, I think it's, what do you guys think? I think it's just repetition over practice over time. It's also, I remember faces a lot better than I do names. In fact, so much so that when we went through the pandemic, when kids came back, they were masked. I've seen those kids later, do not recognize them at all. I can't, they're like, you don't remember, it was the pandemic year. I'm like, I saw this much of you. And I feel really bad because I've always been really good at it. So that's been the hardest part of reflecting with the kids. But I see them out and about too in the metro. I like to climb. I was climbing one day and a kid yelled from below. They're like, Mr. Ike, is that you? And that's been cool too. So I've had a kid show up to a few events and surprise me. I cry pretty frequently when that happens. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. So when you become a teacher, you don't necessarily choose the grade that you might want. I didn't really have in mind what I wanted to teach. I knew that I couldn't do kindergarten because they have so many things to keep track of. And I wasn't an organized young adult. But I was really glad I got sixth grade. The thing I like most about sixth grade, maybe your building's like this, is students go from one building to a brand new one. And so many kids are trying to figure out who they are in this new environment. Am I a funny person? Am I the drama theater kid? Like, who am I? And I like helping them figure that out. And I don't tell kids who they should be. I show them all the different opportunities. And even if there's one track mind, like, I'm gonna do this, and you're like, that's great. Did you also know that you have the ability to do this, and this, and this? And just keep that in mind as you move forward. So that's, I landed in sixth grade, and I fell in love with it, and when I go back to teaching, that's what I want to teach is sixth grade.
Do you get to choose them at some point, or?
No. So I'm on leave from a district here in the Twin Cities, and they hold my position while on professional leave of absence. And then when I come back, they will have jobs that fall into my licensure. And I don't even know if it's like, we have these 8 jobs and pick one. It'll probably just be, we have this job. Do you want it? And that'll be hard too. If it's like, if it is kindergarten, I wouldn't be able to do it justice. I've seen good kindergartner teachers teach, and I know I'm not ready to do that yet. But we'll see. We'll see. I also would love to teach at a collegiate level. I think new teacher classes could benefit from my stories. I have this vision of like only doing a class of situational things. That's it. It's purely situational. And giving kids like, here's your situation. How would you respond? And I think we could have some really good conversations. Yeah. And I am stealing that idea. When I did my master's in educational leadership, the principal of Sibley East High School, I think, or one of the Sibleys, there's a couple. That's all he did, is he started every class with, all right, this is happening in your building as a principal, what do you do? And those situations are even harder. You're like, I don't want to deal with it. And you're like, well, you're principal, so you have to. But I would love to do a class like that. Any other questions about publishing, books?
It's great to hear because I've had memoirs from the minivan sitting in a tree and green binder for years,
Yeah.
afraid to get it out there because, what if nobody liked it?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
you've given me the courage now to send it out and see what happens.
It can happen.
Yeah.
And it's cool too, like, people who don't know who I am and hear that story of perseverance, they're like, wow, you're part of like maybe 5 people have done that. No, a lot of people have done that. The more authors I meet, the more I learn that everyone's story is very different, but a lot of people have taken a chance on themselves and self-published. And those are really cool stories to hear about too, because you learn there's other people out there who went through very similar things, so you have a lot in common right off the bat. And at the time when I self-published, there wasn't as many options either. There's a lot of cheaper options to self-publish books in a way that kind of mitigates the risk financially. I wanted to produce a quality book, so it was expensive. It was very expensive. But I did it, that's the way I wanted to do it, so it worked out well. Yeah.
So if I understood correctly, you said earlier that you weren't a very academic student, growing up.
Correct, yeah.
What effect did that have on the way you teach your students?
It's a great question. So I think the first thing is, so I'll give an example. So, you know, in education, there's always these trends. There was a trend for a while where it was like, what's the, I think it was called the opener. So when kids walk in and they sit down, they gotta do something immediately. That was like a very hot topic, because they need to have, bell work, it's called bell work. And they need to come in and do work right away as they're waiting for other kids. And I tried that and I was like, this doesn't feel right to me, and I'm also not seeing the results. Because my teaching philosophy is when kids are walking in the door, I'm thinking, what is the weather today? What is the weather of this classroom? Because it's always different. Is this gonna be a quiet classroom today? Are we all in the same spot, ready to dig deep? I have to take the temperature of, or the weather, whatever metaphor you wanna use. And so, my teachers did that for me growing up. It was always, you know, personal first. Hey, I drove past your house the other day and noticed that the farmer has new cows. Did you meet the new cows yet? And you're like, oh, I thought we were doing math. And so, like, it's really cool to establish a personal connection. Something that I started doing, this is post-pandemic, is I noticed the rigor of students took a dive. It was really hard to get kids to do work for a longer period of time. And so I started doing circle time, like you do in kindergarten, at an 11 and 12-year-old level. So we would sit down for the first 10, 15 minutes of class and we would just talk. There was no agenda. I would have some like questions on the board, like pop culture and things, but we would do that for 10 or 15 minutes. I even utilized, when I was on TikTok and my social media grew a little bit, people will give you free stuff. So I asked for a hot water dispenser and hot chocolate mix. And so we would drink hot chocolate every Monday and chat. And I always found that if I invested 10, 15 minutes in who kids were at the beginning of class, we moved faster. So my colleagues were never ahead of me. I was never ahead of them. It was I gave kids time, and when I gave them time, then we could dive deep and we could do it really intently. Yeah. So yes, it did. I think it did affect me. And I also think about that too, is like when we see kids in the classroom setting, we're seeing them in a classroom setting. And so if a kid is not doing well in a classroom setting, it doesn't mean they can't do well elsewhere. And so I'll have students who might have struggle with like dyslexia, or one that always was hard to help was dysgraphia, which is like the actual holding of a pencil and trying to write. Some kids can't do it and they'll like snap a pencil and they can't even write their name. And then you go watch them play a hockey game and you're like, wow, you skate beautifully. Or they show you a picture of pheasant hunting and they're like, oh, I got more birds than my dad. And you're like, okay, you're gonna be just fine. You're gonna be just fine. I just have to help you get the skills that are essential. So what is essential? And that's the question of education. I think it's always changing. For me, I think essential is having the ability to communicate your ideas properly and the ability to connect with people. If you can do those two things, I think you can do really well in many different walks of life. But I still have content to teach. So like, just because you have dysgraphia doesn't mean we don't try and write a personal narrative. We just have to find a different way to do it. Yeah. Good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one. So, I always like curveball questions. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that I bumped into your Instagram site by accident, and I thank you for it, because it just was so, at a time in the world when everything was kind of negative, it just brought joy, and there was some positive stories, and you just made me cry today, and I cried every single time I read I listened to your stories, and so thank you for that.
You're
And
welcome.
I just read your Matt Sprout story with my grandkids, and we had fun.
Good.
So now
Thank
I'm
you.
ready to buy Nora.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been cool to share things on Instagram, although I will say social media is exhausting. And so I don't foresee myself doing it forever, on the sole reason that I have to think about my own kids and what they will see of me when I'm gone. So that's why I don't do any paid sponsorships, which is hard, because there's some good money out there that I could be making. But it'd be weird to tell a story that's not mine, and then be like, and also buy this deodorant. Like, you know what I mean? It's not genuine, and so it's also hard because in order to stay relevant on social media and grow, you have to post every single day. You have to follow trends, and I don't want to do that. I don't have the energy or the bandwidth to do it. And so if my stories continue to resonate, great. I think what a lot of people don't know is when you, I didn't know this either, when you reach a certain point of growth, then you start to hit a certain point of not growth. And so I lose like about 150 followers a day. So, and they could be bots, they could be people who are sick of seeing my face, I don't know. But unless I post every day, I shrink. And so from a marketing standpoint, you would want me to grow every day, right? Because then you can sell more books. But if you do follow me on Instagram, you'll see I talk about my books very rarely. Very rarely do I do a whole reel where I'm like, and the Matt Sprouts book will help you. Like, I just don't, because that's not the way that I want to do it. I want people to come to my page and see a story and not have to get through an ad, even if I'm doing the ad for myself. So I know it would help book sales, which is tough, but I also feel like if I'm gonna be an author for a while, doing it in the way that I wanna do it, and doing it in a genuine way, will be a lasting way, if that makes sense. So, thanks for listening to my stories, because I can't be a storyteller without a listener. So thank you.
I love having it around, and every once in a while when you're feeling down, sometimes just open up and read a couple stories, it gets you back and
Yeah.
gets going again. So, thank you for writing
Yeah.
the stories. Anything else?
Yeah, I guess I would also say that I have followed you for a long time on Instagram. And although I'm not in the schools anymore, I was going on 4 years, I enjoy those stories on a level that it brings me back to the people first.
Yeah.
You know, it's that relationship that's what this world's made of, and it's
Yeah.
so important.
Thank you.
I think I have a question. Was it difficult for you to switch from teaching to writing, or like how that journey?
It's a great question.
You know, like
Yeah.
your day-to-day life now versus when you're teaching.
Yeah, there's been a lot of positives and negatives. So I'll start with the positives. I can go to the bathroom when I want. And, you know, when I meet with businesses, it's not nearly the laughter that I just got, because they don't get it. They don't get it. I'm like, there should be like an insurance policy for like what my bladder will be like years from now, and my inability to hold it. I was on someone else's schedule for 15 years. Not just the school schedule by Bell, but every single kid in my room, I'm on their schedule. And so to be on my own schedule is fantastic. Like, I didn't know what it was like. I also didn't know what it was like to put my kids on the bus or go on a walk with my wife who's able to work from home. Like, these are things that I really miss. And sometimes I look at my wife and she looks at me and I go, oh, that's who you are. I remember you. That would be hard to do. Yeah. Some of the negatives is I'm by myself all day, which means I have to fight my own mind all day. And so, as much success as I've had, it's an entertainment industry. And so, a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of, am I doing the right thing? And there's no guide. There's no one there to be like, oh, you should probably do it this way. It's like I'm just throwing cheese to the window to see what sticks some days. And so I've had to learn to be okay with uncertainty, which is hard. My wife works for the finance department, so she's very like numbers and schedule driven. I'm also pretty organized, so to like not know how much my books are making or how much I'm getting paid, that is difficult. And that's hard to be creative when you have fear. It's like looming over you all the time. And so that's why I treat it as this is temporary. If I do it the way that I want to. It's all right. I cry every single book talk I do.
I resonate.
Glad it's finally on camera for the world to see.
I resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on a leave from school.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, so.
It's
It
difficult.
was a difficult decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think there's been a lot more pressure too for teachers. So like when the pressure is gone and then you remember who you are, you're like, wow, that's what I'm like when I'm not lesson planning 3 hours a night. Like, I can be a father and I can do all these other things better than I was doing. And that's the thing too, is like I was present, physically, but mentally not all the time. And my wife knew it too. She'd sometimes be like, "Are you with us?" I'd be like, "Oh, sorry, I'm lesson planning." Like, so that's one of the negatives. I think another part of the transition was, I felt an absence for a while. I didn't know what it was, and I finally figured out I identified as a teacher. That was my whole identity. Much like maybe a firefighter does, I'm assuming. It's just like, that's who I am. I know people like teachers, so that's really cool. And then all of a sudden, I'm not in the classroom. It's like, well, who am I? That's really strange to fight through, and still fighting that one too. Like, what do you want for your legacy? If I go to a different job, what am I doing? That's tough. I also thought I had ADHD for a while, because as a teacher, you are doing this all day, and then all of a sudden all the stimulus is gone, and like the first day that I was writing, I heard like a hum, like, and I was like, what is happening? And so I had to learn how to manage quiet, which sounds so weird to say, but it's the most accurate description I can give you. Is it's weird to be in quiet when you are making decisions for other people all day for 8, 9 hours a day. So when people ask me, well, are the positives outweighing the negative? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. I don't know what I'm doing 5 years from now. I love teaching. I love kids. I also like being a good father. I like having a schedule in which I can stay at home and help kids who are sick. Or I can take a vacation day and not have to plan an entire day when I'm gone and then come back to a disaster. Like but I also wonder, to keep this in mind too while you're on leave, I wonder if I would come back better. I wonder if I would come back as a better teacher. That's kind of cool to think about too.
I'd like to suggest that Kleenex be in your.
No, yeah.
You know?
I do joke that if I do any sponsorship, maybe it's with Kleenex.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's cool too, like, so when I record, maybe here's behind the scenes, when I record stories, you're not seeing always the first take. So sometimes I do the story and it's one take and then I splice it up. Sometimes I do cry and I'm not gonna post me crying on Instagram. I know that that's an easy thing to do to get views. And sometimes I'll leave it if it bubbles up. I'll allow it and then I'll post it. But I also don't want to see myself crying all over the internet. But I'm very mindful about trying to not hop on things that I know will get views. And man, is that hard some days to watch other people just kind of sell out, even people that I know. And that's just my take on social media. That's my own personal take on it.
Do you do all of your own?
On my own videos?
No, I mean, do you have someone who helps with?
No.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
it's all me. It's
Oh my
me.
God.
I'll tell you what, my phone sits on the computer stand that I got for the pandemic. I put it outside on a towel so there's no reverberation of sound. And then I look at myself. And then I post it. I don't have there's media companies that you can send your stuff to and they splice it and they put it everywhere. Nope, it's me hitting my button, filming in 5-degree weather as my battery depletes from my phone. But I wouldn't have it any other way either. I want ownership of it because then if a mistake is made, it's on me, and then I'll learn from it too. And that's why I trust my publisher too. It's like the first time someone's had my work, and it's nice to be able to trust someone with it, especially when they know me.
Comes across the genuineness and the Instagram.
Oh, good, because that's
Sure, I think that's what people resonate with a lot, because it doesn't feel like production quality.
Well, thank you. Well, can you imagine if you were a content creator and you had to have 2 different personalities? I think about that, how exhausting that would be to not only produce, but be someone different, and then people think that's you in real life. That would be hard. So what you see is what you get, I hope. But thank you for noticing. That's what I would like to have happen.
I think you build connection in a way that is so relatable, but also to be able to feel connected on social media is really something amazing that you do.
Thank you. I think I'm able to do that because I have people who are the same kind of people. Does that make sense? Like, I could tell stories all day, but if people who are not in that same brain space are watching that, then there's no connection. So that's why I said one of the best parts is meeting people.
Well, that's encouraging, right? And millions of people that like the positive
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's good.
There are lots of good people, a lot of people doing good things too.
So if you wanted to try to publish a book, like what would your like first step be, or?
Like we're in the position I'm in now, or if I
No.
were,
Just starting out.
okay, so if I were to like,
If I
you
had a
want-
draft of a book
Sure.
and I wanted to move forward with trying to publish it.
My first question to you would be, what's your goal? Is your goal to be in every single bookstore in the United States? Is your goal to make a book?
It's her book, so we should ask her.
You and I can talk more after.
Yeah,
We can,
that's good.
we can have like an author date.
Yeah.
And we can chat.
Okay.
The great thing about my timeline of this is I've had a lot of authors help me. Like I just cold emailed them. I was like, "What are you doing?" They're like, give me some tips." So I'm happy to pass that on. But it really comes down to what's your goal. If your goal is to be in every bookstore, you have to traditionally publish because that process is way more complicated than I ever thought. Even as a New York Times bestseller, I have not gotten into Target. Like it's really hard to get into a store. It's really difficult. I had no idea. Well, like I knew when I independently published my book because I went to all those stores and I was like, "Will you put my book in your store?" And they're like, "Who are you?" Like, no, no. And I just assumed that when you get a good title, right, or an award, that your book is in the stores. That's not how it works at all. It's a lot of people pitching on behalf of you, and those people have to pitch on behalf of those. Like it's a big system. And so, if your goal is to produce things for maybe your grandkids to have on the shelf, or your own personal memoir for your family to have, there are free ways to do that where you can print a book. And so that's the first thing I tell people is what's your goal? That'll just dictate your whole path. And I'm glad that I've had done the self-publishing thing because it allows me to give good advice that I didn't get when I was doing it. I think I can save people a lot of time and energy, and hopefully 15 years. But yeah, it's a complicated
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for doing this, but before I let you go, we always ask guests a few quick questions.
Oh, okay.
Nothing really, just, I have the questions spread out on the store as well. You can feel free to answer those as well.
Okay.
What do you wish you really understood?
Oh, jeez. I thought it was gonna be like, what's your favorite book? What do I wish I understood? I wish I understood people's viewpoints who I disagree with better.
Ooh.
That's what I wish, because sometimes I look at people and what they say, and then I hear their reasoning, and I'm like, what? How on earth could you possibly get to that point? How on earth could you possibly get there? And that's happened with parents too, where I'm like, okay, I don't even know how to start this conversation because we are so far on the opposite side. And so the thing that I wish I understood is how people got to that mindset. I wish I knew their backstory, their narrative, how they grew up, because then I think it paints a better picture of who they are as a person and how they came to that viewpoint. I crushed that answer. I feel good about that. Yeah, that one felt good. Yeah.
What gives you hope?
Kids. Easy. I mean, it's always kids. Even the ones who are struggling, because you watch what they're going through, and not that I look for these stories, but kids who have every single thing stacked against them, and you're like, how are you showing up? I would be crumbling. I would crumble. Kids.
Beautiful.
Emily, what book changed your life?
Oh, changed my
You know,
life.
huh?
I'm gonna take a moment to pause and really think about that one. Give me a second. Because there's like books that are my favorite, but about changing my life, I don't know.
Our favorite book.
Sure.
Something that turned you on to something.
Yeah. Okay, so it's my favorite book, but there's also a backstory, so I'll share that. In 5th grade, I was forced, and I use the word forced for a reason, to read the book The Giver in school. I did not like it at all. Didn't understand it, thought it was a horrible read. Like, obviously didn't test well on it. 'Cause, and then when I went to college, Miss Nan Hackett, who was my like English 101 teacher, had us read 5 books, all completely different types of books. And The Giver was one of them. And I picked that book up, I was like, son of a gun, like, what are the chances? And I knew I had to test well on it, because grades matter in college. And I read it and I loved it. And when I say loved it, I mean like fell in love with it. And so that's a book that really got me hooked on the idea of kids finding a book that resonates with them. So when I meet with kids, you know, they're not all fans of the Matt Sprouts books, they haven't read it. And so I tell kids at the end, I'm like, hey, I would love for you to read my book, but you don't have to. I want you to find a book that helps you find other books. And so to do that, you need to go to the experts, like the booksellers and the book buyers and the librarians, and just say what you're interested in, and those people know way more books than I do. And so The Giver is a book that I think of often as what the relationship to literature can be like. Especially in the eyes of a kid too. Like, if I'm giving a book to a kid and they really don't like reading it, I should probably find another book for them. We can make it work. Those are 3 really good questions, by the way.
Good place to end, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, I'm not gonna run out of here either, like, I'm not on the clock, so I'll just be here if you wanna chat, or come say hi, or get a book signed, and then please make sure you go look for this beautiful bookstore, support your independence, because they are the foundation for a lot of families to get the books that they need. So, okay. Thank you so much for coming, I really appreciate it. Sure, I think I'll just stay right here. And make sure you walk away with a mug too. If you didn't get a mug, I've got more back here, courtesy of Schuler Shoes. There's a gift card in there, a mug with a name on it, and a shoehorn.
I bought 2 sticky notes books, but I haven't read them yet. I'm trying to give one to our principal. And I haven't forgotten about it.
Yeah, that's a high pressure situation.
You came just for this?
Yeah, she's a big fan.
I know. And then I heard about it, so I get a lot of like direct messages on Instagram, and I like set aside time every day to respond to them, but I don't get to them all. But one of them was like, my granddaughter's coming to visit me in Minnesota from Colorado. I was like, oh, that's not happening. Like, that's a fake one. You showed up. But I came ready, so. Yeah, so I gave her a bunch of stuff that like I take to my school visits, because I haven't been invited to Colorado yet, but glad that we met and we'll talk more. So yeah, come on up if you want a book signed or I'm a hugger, so if you want a hug, I'll take one.
Yeah, and then you can.
Did you pick that up? Yeah.
I do too.
And I remember something.
I actually had an idea, because I haven't given my students pictures to Mario.
Yeah.